GIS. When we apply the GIS, and this is the method that I've told you about, when you look at some of the questions in the GIS question, these questions relate to analysis or to use the GIS. Now, the only thing that I can do is to ask you to determine, to identify or name which data layers can be used in solving a problem. And this is where they create a scenario. Now, what I would like you to remember is, when you deal with these questions, have a look at what is said about the question, because that is only to create a little issue or a geographic problem. In that question, you'll be able to recognize also the concept, what it's going to be about. Either be remote sensing, or it's going to be data integration, or it's going to be a buffering question. So the concept is there. Now, can you see that already you know your concepts? You've dealt with it. You've made yourself a mind map using those concepts. And when you know those concepts, it's very easy to answer this type of problem-based question. So without thinking of the GIS or thinking about map work, just look at the problem that's posed, and even then you'll be able to identify the factors that play a role in regarding to that problem or that relates to that problem. And these factors that you then identify will then become the data layers needed in the analysis or to answer the problem in your paper. Right, so for an example is when the question could be something like this: to determine which data layers can be used in a GIS to determine the location of a factory. So what do we need to know about this? First of all, a factory must be close to the resource, depending on what type of factory it's going to be. There must be large enough site, a flat terrain. It's necessary to have a look at the infrastructure like water, electricity, roads, a railway line. It is also necessary to look at the proximity of the markets or the proximity to markets. And then they must also be close to labor force. Now, these 5 features, or what I've identified there, becomes then the data layers that you can look at. First of all, you're going to have a resource data layer. Then you're going to have a look at relief, where you're going to identify flat enough area, large enough as well. Then you're going to look at a layer about the infrastructure, like water, roads, electricity. Then you're going to look at the possible markets and the closeness, the proximity of these sites to those markets. Because remember, it's going to cost a lot of money to transport the goods to that specific market. And then also, you need people to work with you or at your factory. So we want to know where is the closest labor force, because we also want to have all these factors must then be used to identify the most suitable area or location for a factory. Right, what I'm going to do is to show you when sometimes your scenarios will be about shops, or it can be something about a flood, or it can be something about crime. And then what you're going to do is to look at the available plots, the cost of the plots, the distance to other shops, the client base, the buying habits of clients, the central place, and then also the influence sphere. Flooding, the relief, it's obviously that we need to know about the contours and the height above the river line, the history of flooding in that area, the rainfall figures, where's the 50-year flood line, the development that took place above and below the 50-year flood line, where is the location of bridges, because remember, bridges in the case of floods becomes artificial dam walls, because they can actually catch some of the debris, and then this debris catches other debris, and then a artificial dam wall can then be built, and then which leads then to the flooding of the area, and then also residential areas that can be affected, and then most important of all is evacuation routes. If we look at crime, the type of crime, the location where crime took place, the time of the crime, when it took place, the frequency of a specific crime, and then risk zones, and then neighborhood characteristics. Now learners, what I've shown you there is a number of factors that plays a role in each and every, be it a shop or flooding or crime or location of factories. Remember, in the exam, you will always be asked only 2 or 3 of these things. It will never be expected from you to name 7 of them. So when you look at that, ask your teacher to go through these possible factors that play a role, and then make sure that you know which ones will play a role for each and every of these little scenarios or problems then that appears in that question. Right, what we're now going to do is to have a look at some of the previous exam papers. Now, I have brought them along. You will know and notice that from your teacher, you'll be able, we can have the camera from the top, and then most of these times you will be asked to deal with it through a winter school or a spring school, and then sometimes in your extra afternoon classes. So what we're going to do is I'm going to deal first of all with the last year November paper, and then because that's the one that's I think the most available to everyone, and then also on the internet, on the WCED website, you will be able, and in the Gauteng or the Department of Education website, you'll be able to get all these question papers. Work through these questions. You have to go and get them and then deal with each and every one, but only after you have made up your summary and then got that mind map. And then once you've done that, you can actually then use them to answer the questions. And after that, for revision, take previous years' question papers and go through them as well, so that you can actually prepare yourself. Like I said, there's no ways that you can actually score not good enough marks. But not having good enough marks mean only one thing, and that is that you didn't prepare well enough. Now let's look at that question of the GIS. First of all here, the first question is soil erosion is increasing in the area covered by blocks A1 and A3. So what I've got on the map here is to show you block A1 and A3, and there we can see our areas of erosion that they identify. Then the question is, the local municipality has decided to do an environmental impact study to evaluate the influence humans have had on the increase in erosion. Right, now that is the problem. Now they ask us, mention 2 ways in which data can be collected to do an environmental impact study. They're not asking you to explain the environmental impact study. They are asking you to name 2 ways in which data can be collected to do an environmental impact study. Then also, how can this these data that is now collected, can be used to protect the affected areas against further soil erosion? Now, first of all, when we look at that, the different data types is surveys and questionnaires. In other words, field work can also be executed. Then measurements can be made, and then taking rainfall data, and then also measurements about how the soil is being removed after each and every huge storm. Photographs, remote sensing satellite images of previous years. Here we can compare this year with previous years, and we can actually determine the rate of the erosion. Testing of natural environment, like testing soils and water quality, and then also the physical measurements using secondary data. But also physical measurements of the field work that you can execute, and then also use existing maps. Now learners, you can see there, you've only asked, there's been asked only 2, They've given us there 6 different possibilities. You've only need to identify 2 of those. So it's no need to worry about that it's such a difficult question.